he rose as a revolutionary. Young, bold, and unshakably committed to African sovereignty, Captain Ibrahim Traoré captured the imagination of millions across the continent and beyond. In an era when puppet regimes bow to the whispers of Western powers, Traoré's voice roared with independence, defiance, and vision. But behind closed doors, not all leaders shared his dream. While he was rallying youth, confronting imperialism, and calling for a new Pan-African era, 3 African presidents were secretly working against him. Aligning themselves with Western interests, these men didn't just stay silent, they undermined him, they betrayed him, and now the continent is reeling from the aftershock of that betrayal. So who are these leaders? What promises did they make to foreign powers behind Traoré's back? And why would African heads of state sell out one of their own, especially one who dared to fight for freedom? Today, we expose the names, we unpack the motives, and we unravel the deals made in hushed rooms in Paris, Washington, and Brussels. Deals that may have cost Africa one of its boldest voices for liberation. This is not just a political story, it's a story of ideals versus interests, of a new generation versus an old system, and of how, once again, the chains of betrayal were forged not by outsiders, but by our own. Macky Sall, France's loyal gatekeeper in West Africa. When people talk about Macky Sall, the word independent rarely comes to mind. Critics argue that throughout his presidency, Sall danced to the beat of France's drum, serving more as a regional gatekeeper for French influence than a champion for Senegalese sovereignty. And when Burkina Faso, under the bold leadership of Captain Ibrahim Traoré, began cutting off ties with France, Sall's silence spoke volumes, until he subtly helped isolate Traoré on the regional stage. Sall publicly presented himself as a mediator, a diplomatic man who respected the will of the people. But behind closed doors, his government was seen aligning with ECOWAS initiatives that clearly tried to strong-arm revolutionary regimes like Traoré's into submission. Unlike Burkina Faso's sharp anti-imperialist stance, Sall clung tightly to France's economic and military apparatus, from Operation Barkhane to francophone monetary systems under the CFA franc. Even during the rise of anti-French sentiment across the Sahel, Sall stuck with the West, maintaining military partnerships and banking systems dependent on Paris. So when Traoré began speaking of full sovereignty, local control over gold mines, and kicking out foreign troops, the silence from Dakar wasn't just diplomatic, it was strategic. Traoré's revolution threatened to inspire similar awakenings across West Africa. Macky Sall, having spent a decade as the darling of Western investors and French politicians, couldn't risk that. Some say he viewed Traoré not as a brother-in-arms in African leadership, but as a dangerous disruptor to a carefully balanced neo-colonial structure that worked just fine for elites. So yes, Sall may not have thrown public stones, but his quiet compliance and regional maneuvering within ECOWAS contributed directly to the pressure Traoré's government faced. It was betrayal through diplomacy, and many in Burkina Faso haven't forgotten it. Alassane Ouattara, the West's watchdog in Côte d'Ivoire. No one in West Africa has worn the label Western ally as boldly or as unapologetically as Alassane Ouattara. From the moment he returned to power in Côte d'Ivoire with the backing of France and the UN, Ouattara has stood as one of the most loyal pro-Western leaders in the region. And that loyalty has come at a cost, not just to Ivorians, but to revolutionary leaders like Ibrahim Traoré, who refused to play puppet. Ouattara didn't just oppose Traoré quietly, he weaponized regional politics against him. As a power broker within ECOWAS, Ouattara supported sanctions and diplomatic isolation against governments that came to power through popular uprisings, particularly those leaning away from Western influence. The same treatment was extended to Mali and Guinea, but Traoré's Burkina Faso was a special case. His populist rise, his youth, and his bold anti-French stance represented everything Ouattara had spent years trying to suppress. Let's not forget, Ouattara's own political origins trace back to the International Monetary Fund, IMF. He spent years in Washington, D.C., working for the very financial systems that have kept African economies in chains. So it's no surprise that he views leaders like Traoré, who talk of nationalizing resources and pushing out exploitative mining companies, as existential threats. Behind closed doors, Ouattara's regime worked tirelessly to keep the Western military footprint intact in the region. As Traoré threw out French troops and welcomed Russian paramilitaries like the Wagner Group, Ouattara pushed for a unified West African response, not to support Burkina Faso's independence, but to bring it back into the fold of Western-aligned governance. What really burns Traoré's supporters is the hypocrisy. When Ouattara controversially amended the Ivorian constitution to run for a third term, the West stayed quiet. No threats, no sanctions, no ECOWAS outrage. But when Traoré's people demanded a break from colonial power structures, suddenly all hell broke loose. That double standard? It was actively shaped by men like Ouattara, who used his proximity to Western power to undermine those who dared think differently. For many young Africans, Ouattara is the face of the old guard, leaders more interested in protecting foreign interests than uplifting their own people. And to them, his role in sabotaging Traoré's revolution is both clear and unforgivable. Mohamed Bazoum, the poster boy for Western democracy, until he fell. The case of Mohamed Bazoum is almost poetic in its irony. Once hailed as the West's model leader in the Sahel, Bazoum was overthrown in July 2023 by a military junta that accused him of failing to secure Niger's sovereignty and allowing foreign powers to run rampant. And yet, even as Bazoum fell, the international outcry against his ousting was swift and overwhelming, far more intense than any criticism Traoré ever received. But here's the kicker. While Bazoum was basking in the glow of Western approval, he was also actively engaging in alliances that undermined Burkina Faso's sovereignty. His government cooperated with France and the United States to allow drone bases, counterterrorism operations, and even uranium extraction, often without full transparency. To leaders like Traoré, this wasn't just policy, it was betrayal of Pan-African ideals. What made Bazoum's stance even more offensive to revolutionary movements was his posture toward other Sahel leaders. He didn't just align with the West, he lectured his neighbors. Publicly and privately, Bazoum framed governments like those in Mali and Burkina Faso as rogue, illegitimate, and dangerous. He even warned that their irresponsible approach would lead to regional instability. But many argue that instability had been festering for years under Western-backed regimes like his. Traoré's camp saw Bazoum as a mouthpiece for Western agendas. And when Bazoum was ousted, Traoré refused to join the ECOWAS chorus, calling for his reinstatement. Instead, he stood in solidarity with Niger's new leadership. That decision wasn't made lightly. It was a political message. Burkina Faso will no longer serve foreign masters. What adds insult to injury is how the international community reacted. Bazoum's overthrow triggered massive diplomatic outrage. Sanctions were slapped on Niger, military intervention was floated, and Western governments jumped to defend democracy. Yet when Traoré led a movement rooted in youth empowerment, anti-colonialism, and national pride, those same powers called him a threat. This is where the betrayal cuts deepest. Bazoum, who once stood on his high horse pointing fingers at Burkina Faso, had aligned himself with global actors who were never interested in African freedom. Traoré's Burkina Faso didn't shed a tear when he fell, and to many, it was justice served. The bigger picture. Who's really afraid of Ibrahim Traoré? Let's be clear. Traoré didn't just scare the West, he scared the system. A 35-year-old soldier with a populist message, boots firmly on the ground, and a bold vision to free Burkina Faso from the grip of foreign dominance? That's dangerous, not just to Europe or Washington, but to African leaders like Macky Sall, Alassane Ouattara, and Mohamed Bazoum, who've built entire careers maintaining a status quo that benefits everyone but the people. These men didn't simply disagree with Traoré's direction. They saw him as a threat, a destabilizing force, not because of recklessness, but because of his raw potential to ignite a movement. They worked, sometimes quietly, sometimes brazenly, to neutralize him. Through diplomatic isolation, alignment with ECOWAS, and convenient silence in key moments, they attempted to paint Traoré as rogue, illegitimate, or naive. But what they truly feared was not his failure, it was his success. They understood the implications. A young military leader defying neo-colonial powers, calling out foreign monopolies, and awakening national pride could ripple across the continent. His actions threatened their deals, their influence, their Western friendships. So, they betrayed him. Not with bullets, but with pens. Not on the battlefield, but in air-conditioned conference rooms, during photo ops, and in press releases cloaked in phrases like democratic norms and regional stability. In the end, Traoré stood nearly alone, surrounded by presidents more at ease in the corridors of Brussels than in the heart of Ouagadougou. But history may yet favor the one who dared to defy them all. 3 leaders, 1 betrayal: Macky Sall, Alassane Ouattara, Mohamed Bazoum. 3 different men, 3 different countries, but one shared legacy. They stood with the West at a time when Africa needed unity more than ever. Each of them, in his own way, turned his back on the idea of true independence. When Africa's youth rose up to demand sovereignty, to reject neo-colonial control, and to finally reclaim what centuries of imperialism had taken away, these leaders chose silence, or worse, resistance. They chose the comfort of foreign approval over the courage of African solidarity. Ibrahim Traoré, a young and bold figure, didn't just represent a country, he represented a movement, a new generation, a vision for an Africa free from exploitation. But instead of standing by him, Sall, Ouattara, and Bazoum tried to isolate him. Some used diplomacy, others used ECOWAS as a weapon. But the goal was the same: to protect the status quo, even if that meant betraying the hope of the people. While the West praised them as stable allies, the streets of Ouagadougou, Bamako, and Niamey were echoing a different truth: Africa is waking up. And it remembers who stood in the way. Their betrayal wasn't just political, it was historical. It was a rejection of the very spirit of African unity, fought for by the likes of Sankara, Nkrumah, and Lumumba. And when the dust settles, their names won't be remembered as heroes. They'll be remembered as the men who tried to bury a revolution. But as the saying goes, they didn't know we were seeds. History has shown us time and again that the most dangerous threat to a revolutionary is not always the colonizer, it's the collaborator. Ibrahim Traoré's fall from regional unity and strategic influence wasn't only the result of Western pressure, it was enabled, quietly, deliberately, by fellow African leaders who chose self-preservation, foreign investment, and elite partnerships over Pan-African solidarity. But this isn't the end of the story. Across Burkina Faso, Mali, Niger, and beyond, a new consciousness is rising. The betrayal may have slowed the momentum, but it hasn't silenced the movement. Youth across the continent are watching, learning, organizing. To those 3 leaders, your names may be written in the footnotes of diplomatic handbooks. But Traoré's spirit? That's being etched into history books. Africa is changing, and no amount of backroom betrayal can stop the fire that's been lit. If this story moved you, hit that like button, share it, and drop your thoughts in the comments below. And don't forget to subscribe, because as Africa awakens, we'll be right here tracking every twist, every turn, and every truth the mainstream media won't touch. Stay aware, stay alert, stay Pan-African,